you want to stir up a ruckus, whether it's at a family gathering or in the comment section of a YouTube video, all you have to do is talk about religion, politics or sport. That usually does the trick. When it comes to cars, there also are some subjects which are more or less no-go unless you want to face the fury of random strangers. And that's, for example, if you talk about Ford or BMW in a less than courteous way. They're very thin-skinned, BMW and Ford fans. Don't know why, but they're not the only ones though. Don't think I'm picking on them. There's also another subject that really gets people riled up, and that's what propels cars. You might remember the days of Top Gear and how diesel was the fuel of Satan. And when I had my LPG cars, plural, on the LPG forum, there really were loads of people that hated diesel. Now these days it's another form of propulsion, which you can probably guess by the video title. To give you an example of how it really ruffles people's feathers, there's a channel I follow called Hubnut. Great channel. I think many of you also follow it because I've seen you in the comments section. But the tagline is celebrating the average. Mr. Hubnut tends to, not exclusively, but tends to review older cars, but normal cars that took people to school, we went on holidays in, maybe learned to drive in, that sort of thing. Regular cars. It's brilliant. It really is very different from other YouTube channels, because other YouTube channels that talk about cars usually talk about the very expensive, exotic, fast stuff. Cars that 99.9% of us will never even sit in, let alone drive. So because of this, the views of the channel tend to be very open-minded, very accepting of different tastes, because some may prefer old Japanese hatchbacks, others may prefer old French estates, while others have a tendency towards old British sports cars, and others big fat Swedish barges, etc. You get the idea. Now, there's a small story that illustrates this. There's a YouTuber called JM, and he does like the expensive and fast and exotic stuff. And he showed up to one of Hubnut's social gatherings in a Ferrari, which on paper is anathema to the Hubnut faithful. Yet he said everyone was very nice, him very accepting, very, cool about the whole thing. So you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a very, very tolerant group of people. But when Mr. Hubnut decided to do a long-term review of a battery electric Fiat 500, he got a lot of flack, to put it mildly. The comments were rather vicious. The bile was palpable. And I couldn't believe my eyes. Why was this causing such a stir? So that's basically it. Why do people hate electric vehicles so much? You might as well paint a swastika on the door, you'll probably get the same reaction. Now, I can't really fathom these reasons. I personally have got nothing against electric vehicle. In fact, I used to rather like them myself. My very first foray into YouTube was a channel that talked about electric vehicles from the viewpoint of someone who didn't actually own one. God, it's embarrassing. It's been deleted. Don't bother looking for it. It's gone. But anyway, one thing that maybe didn't help people understand EVs was the amount of misconceptions around them, which we'll get to in due course. Another thing that may make people not like EVs is politics. Now, there are various facets to this. You've got the extreme politics of the US. For those of you who maybe live under a rock, don't watch the news, US politics, I wouldn't say it's divided, it's bipolar. Either you're a Democrat or a Republican, and there's very, very little in between that exists even. So you're on one extreme or the other. Now, Republicans, or conservatives, whatever you want to call them, tend to favour big pickup trucks and V8s, rolling coal. I can't do an American accent very well. But yeah, they've got a tendency for big vehicles that use a lot of petrol. Whereas the Democrats or liberals tend to favour hybrids or full-blown electric vehicles to show their credentials as people who love the planet. Now, so I think it's just very silly. I'm not making a value judgment on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, But it is silly to drive things based on political beliefs. So, for example, you might be a full-blooded gun-toting Republican and you drive a Tesla and you think, wow, this car handles well. This car is actually rather quick. It's very practical. It's very quiet. And then someone says, no, those damn liberals, they like this kind of car. I've told you can't do an American accent. And you think, well, it's crap then. I don't like it. It doesn't handle as well as I experienced just a minute ago. That's ridiculous. But that's what happens. This is sort of illustrated by the opposite political beliefs. Now that Elon Musk has behaved himself poorly. Now, he's always been a low IQ moron, but now he's also behaving like a right-wing troll. Who'd have thunk a billionaire that's a right-wing a-hole? Because up until now, he was like a liberal hero, because he was a billionaire, but he cared. He wanted to save the planet. And no, it turns out he's just as money hungry and as much as a self-interested moron as all of them. But anyway, I digress. So now they've got some liberals that are stuck with cars that they bought just, so everyone would know what they believed in, what their political, how much they cared about the planet, that sort of thing. I don't feel sorry for them at all. But so yeah, suddenly you've got people who hate electric vehicles for these political reasons. In America, because over here in Europe it's a different kettle of fish. People who buy electric vehicles tend to be rather well off because they're very expensive, and people who are well off tend to be right-wing over here, or more right-wing, shall we say. Not exclusively, but anyway, doesn't matter. It's not really a political thing, and people really do not buy cars to show off their leanings, their beliefs. They don't. They do it to show off and, look at me, I've got an electric car, I've got a Tesla. Where politics does come into play, I think, is when it comes to, for example, people feeling they're being pushed to buy electric vehicles, whether they want to or not. And maybe being forced not to drive petrol cars. So you've got two facets to this. First, it's the fact that the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles will be banned from a certain year onwards. So people think, oh, I'm going to have to buy an electric car after that. I kind of doubt that, in as much that you'll be able to keep your old petrol or diesel car, no problem whatsoever. No one's going to forbid you from buying it. However, you probably will be forbidden from driving it in city centres, which is another thing. ULEZ, ultra low emission zones. Though many cars do not fall foul of that, but some do. People think it's very unfair, and people think that's another way of forcing them to buy, if not just new cars, electric cars or hybrids or that sort of thing. So then they can resent it because of that. Don't know if that's true, but yeah. Now, I don't think that's a reason to hate electric cars, even if, yes, maybe they are trying to push you to buy something cleaner or newer, and cynically you probably think they're just wanting you to spend money on new cars. But I don't think it's a reason to hate on electric ones. It's not because of that. I don't think they're worse because of what politicians do. So another reason that people might not like electric cars is because, I don't know, there's complicated pieces of machinery. With older petrol and diesel cars, you can get underneath them and, change out filters and get a spanner and a wrench and make it work again. But with electric cars, they're very complicated, unnecessarily so in my humble opinion. You're going to need a laptop, and that's not going to be very fun. On a Sunday morning, what are you going to do, dear? Oh, I'm going to go down to the car and fiddle with this laptop. Not exactly my idea of a fantastic Sunday morning. And electric cars do seem to be unnecessarily complicated, and as I said, they should be very simple, because you just got batteries, a motor, what makes the car go, in terms of the controller or whatnot. And then all you need is some creature comforts like, a radio, some air conditioning, cruise control, and that's it. But no, electric cars have to be very complicated with touch screens, and, Teslas have things like fart machines and a map of Mars and ridiculous things like that. It's pathetic. I don't like that at all. I think electric cars could be and should be a return to very simple bare bones motoring. I mean, I go on, if you're new to the channel, I do go on about this quite a bit. I don't like the fact that modern vehicles have just way too many stupid, unnecessary things in them. But yeah, that's the thing. People might not like electric vehicles because they can't get their fingernails dirty. Who knows? There's another possible reason, and I think it's value for money. I think it's the whole economics. Because electric vehicles are not cheap. And what do you get for spending a lot more than you would an equivalent petrol or diesel car? You get less range and you get a longer charging time. That is changing. Let's see if solid state batteries change the way that works. But that's it in principle. For example, a Renault Zoe, it's a super mini, it's one of the cheapest electric cars you can buy. A couple of years back, I actually did this exercise comparing the price of a Renault Zoe with a... You can't overtake here, you face. Bikers. Where was I? Oh yeah, a couple of years back I did a comparison on how much it would cost to buy and run a Renault Zoe versus buying and running an equivalent petrol-powered super mini. Now, I chose the Citroen C3 because it's a car I like. But the principle stands. If it was a Clio from the same manufacturer, it wouldn't have been that different. So the Citroen C3 back then cost 16,000 euros. It was a base model with a couple of bells and whistles, don't remember what. But these days, even a base model of a C3 does also cost 16,000 euros. The Zoe back then cost 23,500, and I calculated that 7,500 difference in price, which, by the way, included a 5,000 euro government grant, to help you buy the electric vehicle, to subsidise the purchase, so to speak. That 7,500 euro difference allowed you to run the C3 for 100,000 kilometres more or less, given the prices of the day, which of course these days would not be, and also including how much electricity the Zoe would consume in that time, etc. It didn't count maintenance, so I don't know what the maintenance schedule of either one is. Because one thing they try to say, a misconception about electric cars, is that they have no maintenance. That's not true. That can't be true. I mean, tyres wear, do they not? Air conditioning systems have to be recharged, do they not? Is that not maintenance? I mean, come on, yeah, just because you don't have to change the oil doesn't mean it's zero maintenance, but I digress. 100,000 kilometres according to my calculations. So for this video, I went and had a look at what a C3 cost. As I said, it's still 16,000 euros, 16,070 euros if I want to be completely pedantic. The Zoe, 36,500 euros these days. 36,500. I didn't even bother to do the calculations what the difference in running costs would be, because I could buy the C3, lose it, and buy another C3, and I'd still be about 4,000 euros up. Good God, that's not good value for money. So while we're on the subject, the thing is about electric vehicles, and the thing is that to me really ruins them, at least for now. I think this will change, but truth be said, electric vehicles are stupidly expensive. They're still a toy for the rich. And that's the reason why I stopped making that YouTube channel I mentioned earlier, because I was cheerleading for wealthy folk who were probably pointing at me and laughing for me driving a diesel car. At the time it was petrol, but I digress. Driving an electric vehicle sort of implies that you are rather wealthy. It's not just the price of the car itself. It probably also implies that you have a house where you can charge it, because it doesn't really work if you have to charge it away from home. Because I thought about this a lot back when I liked electric vehicles. I used to like them a lot, and I used to think, maybe I should buy one because they're so cheap to run. But the thing is, electric charging stations are still very few and far between, at least where I live. And I think many countries, people complain that the ones that do exist sometimes are offline, they just simply don't work. So if I wanted to charge my electric vehicle, I'd get there, and let's say it's half an hour. I just want to charge for half an hour and my battery will be full enough for the next day. But I get there and someone's already there. So I'll have to wait half an hour or whatever time it is for them to finish charging, then another half an hour for me to charge. So that's an hour gone. Whereas this car, I can fill it up in 5 minutes and then do 1,200 kilometers easily. It's about 750 miles, more or less. So people in the comments of those old videos said, you know, you can make an electric vehicle work. You can, anyone can. You can. First off, I couldn't afford it. And then I had absolutely no way of making it work in my everyday life. I had small children, well, smaller than they are now. And so I'd have to spend most of my life outside trying to charge the car instead of, you know, actually being a dad and taking care of them and all that stuff. Ridiculous. In defense of electric vehicles, they're also subject to many misconceptions. And one of them which really gets me pissed off is when people say, oh, it kicks up more pollutants than normal cars. That's not true. That study's been debunked rather thoroughly. I think it was from the University of Lincoln. Don't quote me on that. And it's just made uppy. You know, because electric vehicles are heavier, so they kick up more pollutants. That's just not, and what was it? And also the tyres wear quicker. That's not true. That's not true at all. And if you've got a big fat SUV, of course, stupid cars as they are, heavy as they are, they also will kick up pollutants. Just as much as electric vehicles, they're just as heavy and they will wear their tyres. It's ridiculous. Also, that they're much more polluting because the electricity comes from coal burning power stations. That's stupid. Even if the electricity is made from the dirtiest lignite, it is still cleaner than petrol and diesel, because that electricity is generated, it comes down a cable, you know, it's transformed a couple of times and then goes into your car. It doesn't have to be stored or refined or any of that. It's more or less, it's not direct, but it's a lot more direct than petrol or diesel. Think about it. The oil has to be pumped out of some dictator's backyard. Then a horrible fossil fuel company pays a lot of money to that dictator so he can continue to repress his people, to buy the oil, and then it has to be brought over on these super tankers which belch out diesel smoke. It burns diesel that is not the same standard as the diesel that I have in my car now, that I'm burning now. It's a lot dirtier. It doesn't have to comply with these emission standards that we have, you know, in cities and such. Then it gets to the country of destination. It has to be pumped out. It has to be refined, which is an incredibly energy-intensive process, incredibly so. So there are loads of emissions there. Then it has to be put onto a diesel burning tanker, which takes it to a petrol station, where it's then stored and then pumped into your car via the pump, which, by the way, sort of shows how silly it is when people say, oh, electric cars are crap because if the power goes out, you won't be able to recharge it. Well, if the power goes out, you won't be able to pump petrol into your car. So there. So if you think about the whole process from the dictator's backyard to your tank, it is a very polluting and long and complicated process. So those are the possible reasons, plus, you know, clearing up some misconceptions why people may not like electric vehicles that much. So if there are reasons that I missed, let me know. But of course, I will ask you, first off, to be civil. We can disagree. There's no problem disagreeing. That's the whole point of this. I mean, if you like electricity or not, it's no skin off my nose. Or me liking it or not, no skin off your nose. So we can disagree. Just ask you as well to make sure your facts aren't just made up, as is very common in these discussions. People tend to cite very, very iffy sources. But anyway, if you made it this far, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, share, etc. Lovely car themed t-shirts at comfortablecar.club. Probably can't see it, but a new shirt. I've changed providers. Well, I am trying to, actually. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you very much, and I bid you farewell.